property tax relief also has been a big topic this session. A resolution introduced this week in the Kansas Senate would amend a part of the Constitution to essentially end property taxes. The bill says that no property in the state shall be subject to property tax after December 31st of 2027. An accompanying bill would enact Kansas Property Tax Freedom Act, which would create a phased elimination of property taxes. It would also create what's called a Kansas Fair Share Purchase Surcharge that would start next January. So this surcharge would be added to every retail purchase in the state. If that purchase is $20 or more, a flat surcharge of $1.60 would be added. If it's less than $20, the surcharge would be 7.6% of the purchase price. There would be exemptions such as groceries. These two bills were brought up as Sedgwick County commissioners met today.
So they are, a week and a half out from having their final hearings, and they're proposing a massive change to our tax structure in the state of Kansas.
The two measures just introduced yesterday. Today they were referred to Senate committees.